My husband tried to take my children while I was arranging his mother's funeral. He filed for emergency custody and told the court I'd abandoned them. He said I was unstable. He said I'd chosen someone else over my own kids. What he didn't tell them was that I was caring for his dying mother at his request. And what he didn't expect was that she left me $4 million and cut him out completely. If you've ever been the wife who held everything together while a grown man sat there feeling owed, you're going to recognize every second of this. And before I get into it, hit like and subscribe. I mean it. I call this story "He Tried to Take My Kids at His Mother's Funeral." Because this story isn't just about money. It's about what happens when a man decides your kindness makes you weak. And what happens when he finds out it doesn't. My name is Claire Willis. I was 52 when this started. I live outside Columbus, Ohio, in a quiet suburb where people wave at each other and pretend they don't hear the arguments through open windows in the summer. I've got 2 kids. Emma was 15. Noah was 11. They were good kids. Normal kids. They still hugged me. They still came to me when they were scared. That's the part John didn't understand. He thought parenting was ownership. I knew it was trust. John was 54. He worked in medical supply sales. He could be charming in public and cutting in private. He wasn't a monster every day. That's what made it confusing. He'd bring home pizza on Friday and play the fun dad, then turn around and say something so entitled it made my stomach go cold. We were middle class. We didn't have a lake house or a vacation home. We had a mortgage and car payments and the kind of savings account that made you feel proud and still anxious at the same time. I used to tell myself John's comments about money were just stress. Like, sure, his mom had done well, but he was still a decent man underneath. He'd coached Noah's Little League team. He'd built Emma a bookshelf when she was 9. He could be gentle. He could be fun. That's the part that messes with you? Because when someone is cruel one minute and normal the next, your brain keeps waiting for the normal version to come back and stay. But money made John itchy. It made him restless. If somebody at work bought a new truck, John suddenly needed one too. If a neighbor remodeled their kitchen, John would stand in ours and talk about how we're due. He didn't say "I want." He said "we deserve." That word started showing up everywhere like a bad smell. And whenever Agatha came up, the word got louder. If her name appeared on his phone, he'd answer in this sweet voice, then hang up and mutter, "Must be nice to sit on a fortune and act like you're doing everyone a favor." If she mentioned a property sale, he'd ask me, "Did she say how much? Did she say what she's doing with it?" It wasn't curiosity. It was counting. Once, a few years earlier, before she got sick, John had come home angry and said his mother wouldn't help with a business idea he had. I asked what happened, and he admitted he'd asked her to co-sign a loan. When she said no, he told her she was selfish. He said it like he was proud of it. Agatha didn't yell. She just went quiet. Later she called me and said, "Your husband thinks my money is his." It isn't. At the time I tried to smooth it over. Now I wish I'd listened harder. Then there was his mother, Agatha. Agatha was 78, sharp as a tack. Not warm. Not cuddly. The kind of woman who could humiliate you with a polite smile. John was her only child. She'd been married to an ordinary city worker. She'd done bookkeeping. Nothing glamorous. But after John moved out, Agatha started buying rental properties. A duplex. Then a small house. Then another. She bought in neighborhoods before the trendy people arrived. She fixed them. She rented them. Then real estate inflation did what it does, and suddenly she had an $8 million estate sitting quietly behind a sensible haircut and a practical purse. John knew it. He knew every property. He knew every street. He knew the numbers the way some men know football stats. And the older Agatha got, the more John's personality changed around the subject of her money. He'd say things like, "Can you imagine if Mom would just do the right thing for once?" Like the right thing was dying on schedule and handing him a check. The first time he said, "I'm her only son. That money should come to me," I actually laughed, because I thought he was joking. He didn't laugh. He looked at me like I was slow. "Who else would it go to, Claire?" he asked, like it was a law of physics. I told him it was her money and her choice. He told me I was naive. And that's when I realized we weren't having a debate. We were watching entitlement turn into a belief system. Agatha never adored me, but she respected me. I showed up. I sent cards. I brought food. I did holidays. I bit my tongue. Over time, she leaned on me more than she leaned on John. Not because she loved me. Because I was dependable. John would visit and talk at her about money. Agatha would call me and ask for help with a prescription pickup. John would text me, ask her if she updated the will. Agatha would ask me how Emma's grades were going. That was the pattern. In March, Agatha was diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer. The kind of diagnosis that comes with a calendar, not a plan. John acted devastated for about 2 days. He bought flowers. He posted a prayers photo. Then the grief evaporated and the greed showed up, dressed like concern. One night at our kitchen table he said, "I need you on my side about the estate." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Mom's stubborn. She might do something stupid." I asked, "Like what?" He said, "Like leaving money to other people. Like leaving anything to you." That hit me hard. Not because I wanted her money. Because my husband was openly accusing me of manipulating a dying woman as if kindness was a scheme. I told him I wasn't in her ear, I was just decent. He smirked and said, "Decent and smart? Mom's old. She gets soft. Don't get confused about what you are." The way he said it made it clear. To him, I wasn't a person in that room. I was an obstacle. Agatha declined fast. Within a month she moved into a hospice facility in Dublin, about 20 minutes from our house. It was clean, quiet, and smelled like sanitizer and sorrow. That's when John started outsourcing his own mother's death to me. At first it was, "Can you go visit?" I'm slammed. Then it was every day. Then it was overnight. He stood in our bedroom while I folded laundry and said, "You're better at the emotional part. She trusts you. I need you there." I reminded him I had a job and kids. He waved it off and said, "Emma can watch Noah for a couple hours. It's fine. This is my mom." Like my children were a scheduling inconvenience. So I went. Because Agatha was dying. Because I didn't want her alone. Because I was still trying to be a good wife who held the family together. The hospice weeks were brutal in a quiet way. Not dramatic. Just steady loss. Agatha would have moments of lucidity where she'd ask about the kids, then moments where she'd think I was her sister. She hated feeling weak. She'd apologize for needing help, then get angry that her body wouldn't cooperate. I saw her pride and fear right up close. John didn't want to see that part. He wanted the version of hospice where you visit, get credit, and leave before anything gets messy. He'd walk in, check her face, then start asking questions that had nothing to do with comfort. "Have you talked to Harold Klein lately, Mom? Did you update anything?" Agatha would stare at him and say, "Why are you like this?" John would laugh and say, "I'm practical." One evening, Agatha was awake and John tried again. He said, "Mom, you know I'm the only one who can keep everything together. If you leave things scattered, it's going to be chaos." Agatha looked at him and said, "You confuse control with competence." I almost choked on my water. John forced a smile like he hadn't been sliced open. After he left, Agatha whispered to me, "He thinks he's a prince." I whispered back, "He's acting like a landlord." Agatha gave a tired little smile. Not even. Landlords fix things. That's who she was. Even dying, she still had her bite. Meanwhile, John would show up around dinner, stay 20 minutes, kiss her forehead, and then whisper to me, ask her about the will. Like her last days were a transaction and I was his collector. One night, while Agatha slept, John leaned back in the chair by the window and said, "I just want you to know. Whatever she leaves, that money is mine. Not ours. Mine." He said it like he was reminding me of a rule. I told him she was still alive. He shrugged. "Not for long. And I'm not letting anyone steal what's supposed to come to me." I told him, "You can't steal an inheritance." He leaned in and said, "Don't get confused, Claire. You're my wife, not her daughter. That estate stays in the family." What he meant was, it stays with him. He didn't say it because he didn't have to. Entitled men rarely explain themselves. They assume you already know your place. A few days later, Agatha asked me to sit close. Her voice was thin, but her eyes were still sharp. "Has John been bothering you?" she asked. I tried to soften it. "He's stressed." Agatha gave a small, humorless smile. "He's greedy." Then she said, "Promise me something. Don't let him use my death to hurt those children." I swallowed and nodded. Agatha whispered, "John doesn't love money. He loves winning. Money is just the scoreboard." Then she closed her eyes and said, "I've already made arrangements." I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I only knew I felt afraid and relieved at the same time. At home, John kept escalating. He didn't even hide it anymore. "You're there. Use it," he told me one night, like my presence at hospice was a weapon. I told him I wasn't shaking down his dying mother. He called me a martyr. Then he used the word that would later show up in his court filing. "You're always somewhere else, Claire. You're disappearing." I stared at him and said, "I'm there because you asked me to be." He shrugged and said, "You should have thought about how that looks." Agatha died on a Thursday morning in May. I was there. I held her hand and told her she wasn't alone. I called John, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Is it time?" Not, "I'm coming." Not, "I'm sorry." Just, "Is it time?" I drove home in a fog. I told Emma and Noah. Emma cried. Noah went silent in that way boys do when they're trying not to fall apart. John walked in 20 minutes later and asked, "Did she ever tell you what she changed?" I stared at him like I didn't recognize the language. "Your mother just died," I said. He pressed his lips together and said, "I know, I'm just trying to understand what we're walking into." Emma was standing in the doorway, watching him talk about money like a man checking a receipt. I told John to wash his face and stop doing this in front of the kids. He snapped, "Don't talk to me like I'm a child." I told him, "Then stop acting like one." The next day I started arranging the funeral. I made lists. I made calls. I did what I always did. I kept it together so my kids could fall apart safely. John called his cousins Tyler and Rebecca, the two Agatha was close with. And in my kitchen on speakerphone he said, "She cut me out once. She'll probably try to do it again. But I'm not letting that stand." I froze. Cut him out once? When John said she'd cut him out once, it hit me like a slap, because he'd never told me that part. After the funeral home call that night, I confronted him. "What do you mean she cut you out once?" I asked. He shrugged like it was a minor misunderstanding. "Years ago she wrote some dramatic will because she was mad at me." "Mad at you for what?" He stared at me like I was annoying. "For asking for help, for pointing out what's fair. John, what did you ask for?" He threw his hands up. "A loan. A down payment. Something. She's sitting on $8 million, Claire. $8 million. And she wanted me to struggle like some kind of character-building exercise." I said, "You didn't struggle." He leaned in, eyes bright with bitterness. "Compared to what we could have had?" "Yes, we did. You don't get it. She watched me work my whole life and she still treated me like I was asking for handouts." I said, "A loan from your mother is literally asking for a handout." He snapped, "It's called being family." Then he said something I still hear in my head sometimes. "When she dies, I'm fixing all of it. I'm taking back what she withheld." Taking back. Like Agatha had stolen from him by not funding his fantasies. That's when I realized his grief wasn't grief. It was grievance. He didn't want to mourn his mother. He wanted to win against her. The funeral was Monday. I got the kids dressed. I held their hands. I tried to keep my breathing steady. At the reception hall after the service, I was standing by the doorway when a man in a gray suit walked up and asked, "Claire Willis?" I nodded, confused. He handed me a folder and said, "You've been served." I opened it with shaking hands and saw the words "emergency motion for temporary custody." My knees went weak. I turned and saw John behind me, calm as stone. "What is this?" I whispered. John said, "It's what I have to do. At your mother's funeral." He shrugged. "You've been gone. The kids need stability." I reminded him I'd been at hospice because he told me to be there. He leaned in and said, low and smug, "And you should have thought about how that looked." I got the kids out of there as fast as I could, but the damage was done. Emma didn't cry at the reception. She went stiff. Her eyes stayed dry and wide like she was memorizing every face in the room. Noah kept looking at John like he'd turned into a different person. On the drive home, Emma finally spoke. So Dad thinks he can just take us? Her voice cracked on the word take. I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel. He filed papers. That doesn't mean he gets what he wants. Noah blurted, why would he do that at Grandma's funeral? Because he's sick, I thought. Because he's greedy. Because he's not safe. But I didn't say any of that to my son. I said because he's angry. And sometimes adults make selfish choices when they're angry. Emma stared out the window. He looked happy when the guy handed you the folder. That line nearly made me pull over. At home, John didn't even try to soften it. He walked in like he'd won something and said, the kids should stay with me until the court sorts it out. It'll look better. He said look better, not be better. Like this was a branding problem. I said they're staying here. This is their home. He smiled in that tight way and said, we'll see what the judge thinks. Then he went upstairs and started making calls, loud enough that Emma heard. Yeah, I had to do it. She's unstable. She's been gone. I can't risk the kids. I stood at the bottom of the stairs listening to him rewrite my life like a story he was pitching for money. That night, Emma knocked on my bedroom door. Mom, she whispered, are we going to be forced to live with him? I pulled her into my arms and said, no, not without a fight. Noah followed her in and climbed onto the bed like he was 8 again. He said, if we have to go, can I bring my Lego set? His voice was small. That's what John did. He made my son worry about toys instead of grief. Emma stepped closer, eyes wide. Mom, what's happening? John put on his Father of the Year voice and told her I'd been distracted lately, and he was making sure she and Noah were taken care of. Emma flinched like his words made her skin crawl. Agatha's sister, Linda, saw the folder and looked at John like she wanted to peel him apart with her bare hands. What did you do? She demanded. John said, I protected my kids. Linda replied, no, John, you protected yourself. That night I read every line of John's filing. He claimed I abandoned the kids. He claimed I was emotionally unstable. He claimed I spent nights away without notice. He claimed I prioritized outside relationships. I laughed once, sharp and ugly. The only relationship I'd had lately was with hospice coffee. I walked into our bedroom with the folder and asked him, outside relationships? John didn't even blink. You've been gone. I don't know what you've been doing. I said, so you lied. He shrugged. I framed it, that's what lawyers do. I told him, no. That's what liars do. John leaned forward and said the quiet part out loud. I'm not letting you take my kids and my mother's money. My stomach dropped. There it was. One sentence. Custody and cash. Same breath, same motive. The next morning I called a family law attorney named Marisol Bennett. She was recommended by a woman at work who'd gone through a nasty divorce and still looked like herself on the other side. Marisol read John's motion and said, this is bad faith. I asked what that meant. She said it means he's using an emergency filing as leverage. Judges don't love it, but we treat it seriously anyway. We win by building the timeline. She asked if I had texts where John told me to go, to stay, to handle his mother's care. I said he texted constantly. He treated me like his assistant. Marisol nodded once. Perfect. Assistants keep receipts. So I became my own historian. Building the timeline became my second job. I'd work all day, then sit at the table at night with my laptop open and scroll back through months of messages. John's texts weren't just requests. They were orders. Stay there. Don't leave her alone. Make sure the nurse updates you. Ask Harold if he called. The whiplash was unreal. Comfort commands and money commands back to back like they were the same category. I printed screenshots and labeled them by date. I requested hospice records. The hospice administrator, a kind woman named Denise, looked at me with sympathy when I explained. She said, we can provide visitor logs. We can also provide notes about who participated in care conferences. I wanted to hug her. I gathered school emails showing I'd been the parent signing forms, answering teachers, scheduling appointments. I pulled bank statements showing I was still buying groceries and paying bills and doing everything I always did. If John wanted to claim I vanished, I was going to show the court I was the one who remained. John kept trying to provoke me while I worked. He'd stroll past and say things like, "You're wasting time." Judges don't like hysterical moms. If I didn't respond, he'd escalate. "You know what you did is disgusting, right? Mom dies and you're already counting your cut." I finally looked up and said, "John, the only person who treated your mother like a check is you." He sneered. "At least I'm honest about what's fair." I said, "You're not honest. You're loud." He leaned in, eyes narrowed. "And you're about to lose." That's when I realized he wasn't scared of losing his family. He was excited by the fight, like it proved he mattered. 2 days later, we had the will reading in an attorney's office in Upper Arlington. Harold Klein, Agatha's estate attorney, sat at the head of a conference table like a man who'd had to deliver bad news to selfish people for decades. He stated the estate was about $8 million in property and liquid assets. John's eyes lit up like a slot machine. Harold read the distributions. $1 million to Tyler. $1 million to Rebecca. $1 million to Agatha's brother Frank. $1 million to her sister Linda. John kept waiting for the part where he got the rest. Harold paused, adjusted his glasses, and said, "To Claire Willis, $4 million in property and cash." The room went silent. John's face moved through shock, rage, and disbelief like it was trying on masks. "What?" he choked out. Harold continued, calm, listing properties and accounts. John slammed his hand on the table. "No, that's wrong. That's my money." Harold didn't flinch. "This is your mother's will, Mr. Willis." John turned to me, eyes wild. "You did this." I said, steady, "I did nothing." He stood up and pointed like I was on trial. "You played her. You stole my inheritance." Linda finally spoke, cold and clear. "Oh, she didn't steal anything, John. Your mother just finally wrote down what she thought of you." Tyler and Rebecca looked like they'd won the lottery and swallowed guilt at the same time. Rebecca kept dabbing her eyes, but she couldn't hide the little spark of excitement. Tyler stared at the table like he was trying to look humble while mentally shopping. John noticed. His gaze snapped between them and me like a predator deciding which throat to go for first. "So you get $1 million, he said to Tyler, voice dripping sarcasm, "and you get $1 million, he said to Rebecca, "and my wife gets 4. Rebecca whispered, "John, please what?" he shot back. "Please accept the money while pretending you feel bad? Please act like this is normal? My own mother just wrote me out like I'm some stranger." Linda looked at him and said, "She wrote you out because you acted like a stranger." John turned on her. "Stay out of this." Harold cut in calm. "Mr. Willis, if you cannot remain respectful, I will end this meeting." John laughed bitterly. "Respectful? My mother just handed my inheritance to my wife and you want me to be respectful?" I looked at him and said quietly, "She didn't hand me anything, John. She took something from you. Your power." That made Tyler shift in his chair like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. Harold said there was also a letter from Agatha. John snapped. "A letter?" Harold read it. Agatha wrote that John had made plays for her money for years. That he treated her like an ATM. That he believed being her only son made him entitled. She wrote that she loved her grandchildren and didn't want them used as leverage. She wrote that Claire had shown compassion when John showed calculation. And she wrote, plainly, that John was to receive nothing. John's face went pale. He looked like a man watching the ground disappear beneath him. Then he hissed at me right there in front of everyone, "You're my wife. You're going to transfer it to me." I looked him in the eyes and said, that single word made him furious. Because men like John don't hear no as an answer. They hear it as a challenge. 2 days after the will reading, we had the temporary custody hearing. Judge Patterson, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience, listened while John's lawyer painted me as absent and unstable. Then Marisol stood up with a binder and said, "Your Honor, we have a timeline." She presented John's texts telling me to stay at hospice. Hospice sign-in records. School emails showing I was still engaged. She noted the papers were served at the funeral. Judge Patterson looked at John and asked, "You served emergency custody papers at a funeral?" John tried to answer, but his lawyer cut in. Judge Patterson held up a hand. "I asked Mr. Willis." John shifted in his seat. "She was gone all the time." Judge Patterson looked at him. "Was she gone because she was caring for your mother?" John's jaw tightened. "That's what she says." Marisol said, "We have his texts, Your Honor. He asked her to stay overnight. He thanked her for handling his mother's care." Judge Patterson's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Willis, do you dispute that you asked your wife to provide end-of-life care for your mother?" John tried to twist it. "I asked her to help, not to abandon our kids." Judge Patterson leaned forward slightly and said, "Do you hear yourself?" The courtroom went quiet. "She denied the emergency motion and ordered the children remain primarily with me pending further proceedings. She gave John parenting time and warned him about respectful communication." John looked shocked, like he'd expected the court to applaud him for being cruel. In the parking lot, Emma asked me quietly, "He's doing this because of the money, isn't he?" Noah stood behind her, jaw tight, and muttered that his dad was being a jerk. I told them, "This is grown-up business. Your job is to be kids. Your job is school and friends and sleep. My job is protecting you. And if you're listening and you've ever had someone try to punish you for being good, leave a comment. Seriously. I want you to see how many of us have lived through some version of this." John didn't calm down after losing the emergency motion. He escalated. He started texting me late at night, flipping from pleading to threatening in minutes. "Be reasonable. It's for the kids. Then you're stealing from my family. Then if you don't give me what's mine, I'll make sure you regret it." I forwarded every message to Marisol. He also used his cousins as pressure. Rebecca called and told me to compromise because John was the only son. I told her Agatha didn't write her will out of tradition. She wrote it out of truth. Tyler showed up and tried to talk about John feeling humiliated. I told him John humiliated himself. He chose greed over grief. Tyler left looking irritated, like I'd refused to play the role he wanted from me. Then John went after my credibility. After the evaluation request, John got nastier in smaller ways. He'd show up to pick up Noah and say, "Loud enough for the neighbors, tell your mom I hope she's taking her meds." He'd tell Emma, "Your mother's not well. She's being influenced." Emma would come inside shaking with rage and say, "He's disgusting." I'd tell her, "Don't feed it. He wants you to react so he can say you're unstable too." It broke my heart to coach my own daughter through emotional warfare. He also started telling people at church that I'd changed. He told mutual friends I was greedy. He told his coworkers I was using the kids. One woman from our neighborhood, a well-meaning gossip, pulled me aside at a barbecue and said, "Claire, I heard you're not letting John see the kids." I looked her in the eye and said, "John filed to take the kids at a funeral. If he's upset about the consequences, he should talk to a mirror." That shut her up. At home, I kept my routines. Dinner. Homework. Laundry. Life. John wanted chaos. I refused to give it to him. Every time I kept the kids' lives normal, it took a brick out of his argument. Marisol also brought in a counselor's note from Emma's therapist. Emma had started having panic spikes, especially at night. The therapist wrote that the stress was tied to parental conflict and perceived emotional coercion. John read that phrase in a filing and scoffed, "Coercion? What, like I'm holding them hostage?" And I wanted to scream, "Yes. That is exactly what you did." But instead I said, "Stop making your kids anxiety about your ego." He snapped, "You're poisoning them against me." I said, "John, poison works quietly. You did this loudly." John filed a request for a guardian ad litem and a psychological evaluation for me, claiming I was unstable and alienating the kids. When I saw it, my hands went numb. Marisol called and said, "This is a tactic. It means he's panicking. If the court orders it, you comply and you pass. And it makes him look worse." That's when I understood the real danger. John didn't just want custody. He wanted a narrative that made me the villain so he could take what he wanted without guilt. The months between hearings were exhausting. Not dramatic exhaustion. Paper exhaustion. Every exchange logged. Every email saved. Every school note documented. John would show up late for pickup, then text that I was screaming at him. He'd send aggressive messages through the parenting app, then tell the court I was hostile. He tried to bait me into reactions he could screenshot. I stopped taking the bait. I went quiet. Calm. Controlled. Not cold. Just done. In August we had the final custody hearing. Judge Patterson had the full record. She had John's filings. She had the hospice timeline. She had the texts where John demanded the inheritance. She had the school counselor's notes about Emma's anxiety. She had reports showing Noah's grades had dipped during the chaos. Marisol told the court Mr. Willis's filings escalated immediately after he learned he was cut out of the estate. He has attempted to use the children as leverage to compel asset transfer. This is coercion, not co-parenting. Judge Patterson looked directly at John. Mr. Willis, do you believe you are entitled to your mother's estate because you are her only son? John lifted his chin and said yes. The honesty was almost impressive. Then the judge asked, do you believe you are entitled to your wife's inheritance because she is your wife? John said, what's hers is ours. Judge Patterson stared at him and said, you do not understand the difference between partnership and ownership. Then she said the line I'll remember for the rest of my life. Love is not a feeling you announce. Love is what you do when you're angry. John sat there blinking, like he'd never considered that his behavior counted more than his claims. Judge Patterson awarded me primary physical custody. She ordered John to have supervised parenting time for 12 weeks, with a review after he completed a co-parenting course and demonstrated respectful communication. She said plainly that she did not trust him to prioritize the children over his resentment. John looked like he'd been punched. Not because he loved the kids so much. Because he'd lost his leverage. Outside the courtroom, John turned to me and hissed, you did this. I stepped closer and said, calm, no, John. You did. You just finally had witnesses. He opened his mouth, then closed it because there was nothing left. Courts are brutal like that. They don't care how you feel, you deserve to be seen. They care what you did. That week I filed for divorce. John told everyone I was divorcing him because I got rich. That I'd changed. That I was greedy. He said it like he didn't spend months drooling over his mother's money like a man at a buffet. He stormed into the kitchen one night and said, you're divorcing me because you think you're better than me now. I looked him in the eye and said, John, I was better than you when I was broke. He didn't even know what to do with that. Men like him don't understand a woman's value unless it has a dollar sign. He tried to threaten me again. If you don't give me half, I'll drag this out for years. I told him the only thing you have left to threaten me with is more of you. And honestly, that's not a threat. That's a promise. He stood there breathing hard, looking for a way to hurt me that wouldn't leave marks, and then he left. The divorce itself was quieter than the custody battle, because the law is not impressed by tantrums. John tried to claim a share of the inheritance. Agatha's will and the separate accounts shut that down. John tried to argue the properties were family assets. The paperwork shut that down too. He tried to make it about fairness. The judge made it about facts. 6 months after I filed, the divorce was final. The custody order remained. John's supervised visits transitioned to standard visitation only after he completed what the court ordered and stopped acting like a man who thought children were bargaining chips. Even then, the relationship with the kids was damaged. That wasn't my doing. That was his. Kids don't forget the feeling of being used. With part of the inheritance, I bought a modest home closer to the kids' school. Not a mansion. Not a show. Just a safe place where nobody could slam a door and call it love. I funded Emma's college account. I funded Noah's future. I paid off my car. I repaired my parents' roof. I invested the rest like a woman who knows money isn't a toy. It's protection. The air in our house changed. Emma started sleeping again. Noah started laughing again. A month after the divorce was final, John tried one last time to poke at the wound. He sent a message through the parenting app that said, you got what you wanted. Hope it was worth destroying a family. I stared at it for a long time before I typed back. I wrote, John, you tried to trade our children for money. You filed papers at a funeral. You lied in court. You threatened me in writing. The family wasn't destroyed by my response. It was destroyed by your choice. Then I stopped. No extra sentence. No lecture. Just the truth. The next exchange, John showed up with that same tight smile and said, "So we're really doing this?" I looked at him and said, "We're really doing what you started." He scoffed. "You think you're some hero?" I shook my head. "No. I think I'm a mother, and you forgot what that means." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Emma walked past him without speaking. Noah nodded once and got into the car. And John stood there on the curb, watching the moment he'd created, finally realizing money doesn't buy respect from your own children. That was the payoff Agatha left behind. Not the properties. Not the cash. The truth. On paper. In court. In the eyes of his kids. Permanent. So if you're listening and you're in the middle of a betrayal that's making you question your own sanity, hear me. You don't need to scream to be strong. You don't need to beg to be believed. When someone shows you they're willing to trade your children for money, the only power move left is to stop protecting them. I didn't win by being louder. I won by being done. My name is Claire Willis, and this is what happened when I was pushed beyond restraint. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this story.